I still remember the morning before everything changed. Brewing coffee and matching mugs Marcus had given us for our anniversary, both of us in scrubs, planning our future. The steam curled between us as we leaned across our kitchen island, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. To 15 more years at Lakeside, he'd said, clinking his mug against mine. And to us, 12 years and counting. I had no idea that in 24 hours both my marriage and the career I'd built would be shattered. My name is Eliza Matthews, and for 15 years, I've dedicated my life to Lakeside Memorial Hospital in Portland. I worked my way up from staff nurse to head nurse and nursing coordinator, implementing protocols that reduced medication errors by 40% and improved patient outcomes across every measurable metric. My husband Marcus and I met at the hospital when we were both fresh-faced and idealistic. He in administration, me in patient care. We shared a vision. A hospital where every patient received the absolute best care possible and every staff member felt valued. At least I thought we shared that vision. When Pinnacle Healthcare Group acquired our hospital last year, we celebrated with champagne. Marcus saw it as his big chance to move up the ladder, and I believed that with more resources, we could make Lakeside even better. Think of what we can accomplish with proper funding, I'd told my nursing staff, their faces uncertain as rumors of corporate takeovers and staff cuts swirled. We'll finally get that new patient monitoring system I've been requesting for years. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. The first changes were subtle. Budget meetings I wasn't invited to. Decision-making gradually shifting away from those of us on the front lines. Then came Vanessa Powell. 28 years old with an MBA in designer suits that made my practical scrubs seem dowdy by comparison. Efficiency consultant, her email signature read. The first time I saw her in Marcus's office, I thought nothing of it. The fifth time I noticed his hand lingering on her shoulder as they reviewed a spreadsheet, I felt a cold splash of something like dread in my stomach. You're imagining things, I told myself. Marcus wouldn't. But the late nights at the office increased. The texts from work, interrupting our rare dinners together. The sudden change in cologne. The way he'd shower immediately after coming home. Classic signs I'd heard from friends' stories of unfaithful spouses, but somehow I wouldn't, connect those dots to my own marriage. Meanwhile, at work, Vanessa began questioning my methods. These double-check procedures are redundant, she announced during a staff meeting, red pen slashing through the safety protocols I'd carefully developed over a decade. We're losing efficiency. Those redundancies prevent medication errors, I countered, feeling Marcus's eyes on me from across the room. They save lives. Vanessa smiled, that perfect practice smile that never reached her eyes. The research suggests otherwise. We'll be implementing new protocols next month. The first time I saw them laughing together in the cafeteria, something twisted in my chest. The way he leaned toward her, it was familiar in a way that made me sick. That same day, 3 of my nurse training sessions were canceled due to quote, budget constraints. The parallels weren't lost on me, but I still couldn't believe he would do this. To me, to us, to our patients. I confronted Marcus that night, my hands shaking as I chopped vegetables for dinner. What's going on with you and Vanessa? The knife slipped, nearly catching my finger. He didn't look up from his phone. What do you mean? That casual dismissal, that practiced indifference. You seem close. He sighed, the sound so condescending it made my jaw clench. She's good at her job, Eliza. Maybe if you were more open to the changes Pinnacle wants, you wouldn't feel so threatened. Threatened. As if my concerns about patient safety were just professional jealousy. As if my worries about our marriage were female insecurity. I went to bed that night staring at the ceiling, feeling him breathing beside me, wondering when this stranger had replaced my husband. A week later I was called to a meeting. Marcus, Sophia from HR, Dr. Chen, all sitting around a conference table with expressions carefully arranged into corporate sympathy. Due to restructuring, Sophia began, sliding a folder across the table. We're adjusting your position. My throat tightened as I scanned the document. Demotion to regular floor nurse. 30% pay cut. Reporting structure changed to put me under Vanessa's supervision. This is a joke, right? My voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. Dr. Chen cleared his throat. Vanessa will be taking over protocol development. She has some innovative ideas about streamlining patient care. Streamlining? I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. You mean cutting corners? These protocols exist for a reason. patients will be at risk. That's unnecessarily alarmist, Eliza. Marcus finally spoke, his voice professionally detached. Pinnacle has successfully implemented these changes at their other facilities. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw nothing of the man I'd married. So that's it? 15 years of experience means nothing? Sophia shifted uncomfortably. Your years of service have been noted. That's why we're offering you a position at all. The unspoken message was clear. Be grateful you're not being completely discarded. Be a good girl and accept your demotion graciously. I left that meeting in a fog, barely registering the sympathetic glances from nurses who'd already heard the news through the hospital grapevine. My phone buzzed with texts from Claire, Michael, and Daphne, the senior nurses who'd worked with me for years, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Instead, I left work early, something I almost never did. I needed to talk to Marcus alone, away from the hospital politics. I needed my husband, not the hospital administrator. Our house was quiet when I arrived, the afternoon sun slanting through windows I'd carefully chosen curtains for when we bought the place 5 years ago. I kicked off my shoes, heading upstairs to change out of my scrubs. That's when I heard it. A soft laugh. Her laugh. Standing in the doorway of our bedroom, seeing them together in the bed, where we'd made plans for our future, something broke inside me. For 15 years I'd poured my heart into that hospital, and for 12 years I'd given everything to our marriage. In a single day I'd been replaced in both, by the same woman. When Marcus saw me, he didn't even look surprised, just resigned, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. That's when I knew how long this betrayal had been brewing. Eliza, he started, but I was already backing away, my wedding ring suddenly burning against my skin. How long? I whispered, though I didn't really need the answer. Vanessa had the decency to look embarrassed as she clutched my sheets, to her chest. Marcus stood, reaching for his discarded pants. It's complicated. 3 words that conveyed absolutely nothing, and everything. It wasn't complicated, it was the oldest story in the world. Man grows tired of aging wife. Man finds younger model. Man discards the old for the new. The only twist was that he'd let her take my career too. I didn't scream, I didn't throw things. I simply turned around, walked downstairs, and sat at our kitchen table, until the shock turned to ice in my veins. It took Marcus 17 minutes to come downstairs. I watched each minute tick by on the microwave clock. He found me staring at our anniversary photo on the refrigerator. I was gonna tell you, he said, as if that somehow made everything better. After the restructuring was complete. Of course. Wouldn't want the professional betrayal to be complicated by the personal one. Always the efficient administrator. I want you out, I said quietly. Tonight. He had the audacity to look wounded. This is my house too. We can discuss this like adults. Like adults? I laughed, the sound sharp and unfamiliar. Adults don't sneak around. Adults don't bring their mistresses into their marital bed. Adults don't demote their spouses to make room for their girlfriends. Each word felt like it was being torn from somewhere deep inside me. Get out. He left. Temporarily, he said. To give me space, he said. But we both knew. 3 days later, I found a small apartment near the hospital. I couldn't afford much with my reduced salary, but I couldn't stay in that house another night. Claire helped me move, her silent support worth more than any words of comfort. You could sue, she suggested as we carried the last box up 3 flights of stairs to my new place. Workplace discrimination, hostile environment, the timing of your demotion and everything else. It's not a coincidence. I shook my head. I still need a job, and the patients still need care. Especially now, I didn't add. Because within 2 weeks of Vanessa implementing her, quote, streamlined protocols, we began seeing the consequences. Medication errors increased. Patient falls spiked. Infection rates crept upward. The nurses were overworked. The patient-to-nurse ratios stretched beyond safety margins. I documented everything, working my regular shifts while keeping meticulous records of every near miss, every actual error, every policy violation. Claire, Michael, and Daphne did the same, quietly passing me information when managers weren't looking. This is dangerous, Michael whispered one day as we watched a new nurse, clearly overwhelmed, trying to manage too many critical patients without proper support. Someone's gonna die. He wasn't being dramatic, he was being realistic. Each night, I came home to my empty apartment and added to my growing files. Patient incident reports, staffing schedules showing impossible workloads, comparative statistics from before and after, the quote, efficiency measures. My marriage was over, but I wouldn't let patients suffer because of corporate greed and my ex-husband's midlife crisis. Have you ever been replaced by someone who didn't understand your value? Share your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of betrayal and resilience. The breaking point came 6 weeks after my demotion. Mrs. Eleanor Winters, an 83-year-old grandmother recovering from heart surgery, was given the wrong medication dosage. Under my old protocols, 3 separate checks would have caught the error. Under Vanessa's streamlined system, with overworked nurses and eliminated safeguards, the error went through. By the time anyone realized, Mrs. Winters was coding. We saved her, barely, but standing there in the ICU, watching her family weeping with relief that she'd survived, something hardened in my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't even about Marcus and his betrayal. This was about lives being put at risk. That night, I compiled everything. Every statistic, every incident report, every comparison between before and after Vanessa's changes. I wrote a detailed analysis showing the direct correlation between eliminated safety protocols and increased errors. Then I made 4 copies. 1 went to the hospital board of directors. 1 to the state medical licensing board. 1 to a journalist I trusted at the Portland Tribune who had previously covered healthcare safety issues. And the last, I personally delivered to Marcus's office. "What is this?" he asked, not bothering to look up from his computer when I placed the thick folder on his desk. "The consequences of your choices," I replied, my voice steady. "Professional and personal." That got his attention. He flipped through the pages, his face paling as he realized what he was seeing. "You can't send this to the board." "Do you have any idea? I already did," I cut him off, "and to the licensing board, and the Tribune." He stood up so quickly his chair hit the wall behind him. "Are you insane? This will destroy the hospital's reputation." "No," I corrected him. "This will save patients' lives." I turned to leave, but his words stopped me. "I can fix this, Eliza. We can make this go away. Come back home. We can work on us, while I handle this professionally." The desperation in his voice almost made me laugh. Now he wanted to work on us? Now that his precious reputation was on the line? "There is no us to work on," I said quietly. "And this isn't something you can fix with charm and promises." The investigation happened quickly. Within days, the licensing board had representatives at the hospital. Within a week, the Tribune ran a front-page expose on patient safety violations at Lakeside. Within 2 weeks, Pinnacle Healthcare Group sent in their crisis management team. The board meeting was something I'll never forget. I was called to testify, not as the whistleblower, but as the former nursing coordinator whose protocols had been dismantled. I sat across from Marcus and Vanessa, their body language now stiff and formal, no trace of their former intimacy. As I methodically presented the evidence of how safety had been compromised, I felt nothing but a deep sadness for the damage done. When his turn came, Marcus tried to distance himself from the decisions. "These protocol changes were Ms. Powell's recommendations," he said smoothly. "Administration relied on her expertise." Vanessa's head snapped toward him, her perfect composure finally cracking. "That's not true," she countered. "You specifically pushed for faster implementation despite my warnings about training gaps. You said we needed to show immediate cost savings to Pinnacle." Watching them turn on each other in that boardroom, I felt no satisfaction, only a hollow confirmation of what I'd already learned. Neither of them had ever truly cared about the patients or the staff. And Marcus had never truly valued me, as a wife or as a professional. The board's decision came down like a hammer. My protocols were to be reinstated immediately. A patient safety oversight committee would be established. Marcus was placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. Vanessa's contract was terminated. And I was offered my old position back, with a raise and direct reporting line to the board rather than to administration. I accepted. Not for the vindication, but for the patients. In the aftermath, changes rippled through Lakeside. Pinnacle, desperate to salvage their reputation, allocated additional resources for patient safety. Nurses who had left due to the unbearable working conditions were invited back. And slowly, our error rates began to decrease again. I threw myself into rebuilding what had been broken, finding unexpected strength in the wreckage of my personal life. My divorce proceeded quickly. Marcus didn't contest anything after his professional disgrace. I heard through hospital gossip that Vanessa had already moved on to another healthcare system in Seattle. And then, 3 months later, he appeared at my apartment door, flowers in hand and remorse in his eyes. "I made a terrible mistake," he said, his voice breaking. "The biggest mistake of my life." He looked thinner, older, the confident administrator replaced by a humbled man. "I miss you. Every day I miss you. What we had," I interrupted gently, "wasn't what I thought it was. I didn't invite him in." When Marcus came to my apartment, crying and asking for another chance, I felt something unexpected. Pity. He'd lost everything that mattered by chasing something that was never real. I had lost too, but in that loss I discovered my own strength. "Some broken things can't be repaired," I told him, "but some broken people can rebuild themselves stronger." As I closed the door on him for the last time, I realized I was no longer the woman who had been replaced. I had become irreplaceable. The hospital recognized it too. My new title, Director of Patient Safety and Nursing Excellence, came with an office, a dedicated team, and the authority I needed to protect our patients. Last week, I walked past the framed Tribune article, now hanging in the hospital lobby, a reminder of how close we'd come to disaster and how standing up for what's right had changed everything. A nurse stopped me, someone new I didn't recognize. "I applied here because of you," she said shyly. "Because of what you did. I wanted to work somewhere that values patient safety over profit." I smiled, thinking how from the deepest betrayal can come unexpected purpose. Sometimes I still wake up reaching for someone who isn't there. Sometimes I drive past our old house and wonder about the life I thought I'd have. But those moments grow fewer with time. The betrayal taught me something profound. My worth was never defined by how others valued me, but by the standards I set for myself. Every patient who leaves our hospital healthy is a reminder that fighting for what's right, even when it breaks your heart, is always worth it in the end. Has standing up for what's right ever cost you personally? Tell us your story in the comments, and hit subscribe to join our community of survivors who've turned betrayal into strength. Life after betrayal isn't easy. There are still days when the double loss of my marriage and my professional standing hits me with unexpected force. But there are also days of profound gratitude, for the colleagues who stood beside me, for the strength I didn't know I possessed, and yes, even for the painful clarity that comes from seeing people's true characters revealed in crisis. Last month, I ran into Dr. Chen at a healthcare conference. He approached me cautiously, clearly uncertain of his welcome. "We made a terrible mistake," he said simply. "I made a terrible mistake. Not trusting your experience was the worst decision I've been part of in my 30 years of practice." I accepted his apology with grace, not because he deserved it, but because holding on to anger would only diminish my own healing. "We learn from our mistakes," I told him, "or we're doomed to repeat them." Later that evening, as I gave my presentation on building a culture of patient safety, I looked out at the audience and saw dozens of healthcare professionals leaning forward, taking notes, nodding in recognition. My personal pain had transformed into something bigger than myself, a mission to ensure what happened at Lakeside never happened elsewhere. Driving home that night, I realized something profound. Sometimes being replaced isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a better one. If my story resonates with you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear that betrayal doesn't have the final say in defining your worth. And remember, no one can replace you when you know your own value.